All right, so before we get started, quick overview. So I use, instead of like VS Code or Atom or something like that, I use a setup called Tmux and Vim. So when you see these things down at the bottom, these are different terminals. It's just like having different tabs in your terminal, or like having different terminal windows open. That's just those there. So I can have multiple ones and just switch back and forth, and it shows you the highlighted one is the one that I'm on right now. So that's thing number one. And the other is, this is my text editor. It's a command line text editor called Vim. It works exactly like VS Code or Atom or any of the other ones. You use it in very different ways though. But we have things up across the top. Those are like different files that you open. So if I want to open the README, for example, I have these two files open and I jump back and forth between them. It looks super ghetto and whatever else, but it is hands down the fastest text editor in the world. You probably have better uses of your 15 weeks than learning Vim. There's, in most cohorts, about one person who doesn't believe me and just really wants to dive down the Vim rabbit hole. If that ends up being you, I got so many resources for you. But for everybody else, like, this is a thing that you can pick up whenever. But it also makes it so that I don't have to think I don't have to think about what I'm typing while I'm talking out loud, because the way that Vim works is it's all muscle memory. And so just short circuits your brain, goes right through your spine. All right, any questions before we get started? Yeah.
Just a buddy of mine told me that like one of the most Google things is how to quit.
That's accurate. So should you find yourself in something that looks kind of like this, and you're like, get me out of here, quitting it is not intuitive. The correct answer is you do colon, it shows up there, Q, question mark, and that quits. An even easier one, I think to remember, is capital ZZ, like if you do capital ZZ, it does the same thing. But yeah, it's such a text editor that's so hard to use, it's not even obvious how you quit it. Or which leads to the excellent joke, oh, I've been using Vim for 20 years. I just don't know how to quit. Cool. Other questions? All right. So let's take a look at what we're doing here. I kept the hash in here, so I have passing tests for game hash. But hopefully you got a lot of syntax practice trying to get everything to line up correctly. So those instructions on how to do that. Method building. Build a method, num point scored, that takes in an argument of a player's name and returns the number of points scored for that player. So I'm going to try to use the same approach to all of these. So if I'm doing like step one of that whiteboarding process, like clarify the what and the why. All right, so if I'm translating this into code, build a method, num points scored. Well, let's just start there. Def num points scored and done. That takes in an argument of a player's name. All right, how about player name? I'm halfway done. And returns the number of points scored for that player. So, and I'll say num points is the thing that's going to be returned. And maybe I initialize it to 0. So at this point, we know that some magic needs to happen. If I run those tests again, cool, it was expecting 10 and got 0. The approach that I just used is called sandwich code. I know exactly how this is supposed to start. I know how it's supposed to end. I just don't know how I get from this to this. But every time you find yourself working through a problem and you're like, oh man, I don't even know where to get started, take a look back at the instructions. I'm already like halfway through the fucking thing. Sandwich code. One quick editorial that you'll get no shortage of those from me over the next 15 weeks is please don't use these programmer abbreves. If learn is making you use them, whatever, do it. Get the thing to turn green. But there is no reason to say num points scored instead of like number of points scored. You can just write like an actual human. There's some, and I think this goes back to when computing power was so expensive that like this did make a difference. But it drives me nuts when people feel like they talk like a computer to make a computer understand them better. You can talk like a grown-up. Number of points scored is a perfectly fine method, babe. All right, so what does it want? The number of points scored for that player. So if we look through this, the players are here. I want to pass in Jeff Adrian and get back 10. Woof. Give me some approaches to this. How'd you guys try to solve this? Volunteer.
So I kind of did, and this is where I like some insight. I kind of did like a helper function that would just return the hash of any given player. So transverse both the home and away and find a player by name. Clear that or assemble like a giant array of all the players' data and then just be able to search by name.
Okay.
So kind of did some intermediate stuff versus just trying to dig straight down.
Excellent. Give me some more approaches. Yeah.
Dot each and
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think the way that the people who wrote this were expecting you to do it is a bunch of like nested dot eaches. Each do this, each do this, each do this. Any other approaches you guys used?
I was using a lot of map,
Mm-hmm.
and definitely some screen share that I did. The tech coach had informed me that she used each a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed though that just map always worked for me, at least in this situation where maybe each did it once, and I can't recall that time, but map for me just worked better with my brain, with what I'm trying to do, I guess. But,
Cool. So let's explore a little bit. First, let's start with and forgive me, I wasn't here yesterday. Zach? Cool. So Zach's talking about when we use map versus when we use each. They do very similar things. What's the difference?
Return value?
Return value. How is the return value different? Corey?
Yeah.
Cool.
So I might get them in reverse.
Okay.
I think dot each, if you have an array, for instance, and
Mhm.
you dot each it will return each element in the array as it is, whereas dot map will return each element with nil,
Mm-hmm.
but it might be in reverse.
Okay, it is.
Okay.
More broadly, mapping something is transforming something. I have 3 numbers, and I want to turn them into doubles. So I get 1, 2, 3. I want 2, 4, 6. That's a map. And those transformations can be kind of complex. But the idea is we end with the same number of things that we started with, and the things that we end with are transformed in some way. That's a map. Each is just, I want to do something this many times. If there are 11 things in this array or hash, then I just want to do something 11 times. Or in the case of like this, I just want a way to search through something. To search through something, I have to look through every one of them. So that's why you would use each. But if I want to map through something to, for example, I want to map through these players and just get back everybody's shoe sizes. So I end up with an array of those. That's a map. I start with 10 players, I end with 10 shoe sizes. Map. Cool. So that like nested eaches way is probably how most of you did it. It's kind of the intended way. Yeah.
Is the return different for mapping?
Each is not supposed to return anything. I think it does in Ruby, but like don't count on that because it doesn't in most languages. That's like, I want this to be done this many times. And a lot of you probably had a variable where you like initialize it to an empty string or something, and then when you find it in that loop, you assign it. That's a totally valid use of each. But don't count on each to return anything. In fact, that's a hint that you should be using each instead of map. If nothing should be returned, that's probably an each situation. Putzing is a good example of that. Great question. Cool. So of those two approaches, where Doug's was make these like little helper functions, I like the helper functions way. So a way that, like when I did this, this for real, when I started here, what I did was, I have this hash, and it's got these two keys, and they have keys, and they have this array. So the challenge is I have an array of 5 and an array of 5, and it might be in either one. Wouldn't this be easier if I had an array of 10? Like, it's practically no work at that point. So if I change the question to be, how do I get all of this hash to just be an array of 10 players? That might come in handy. So let's say I make a players helper method. So goal here is to just return all 10 players in an array. If I wanted to do that, how? Combine them. Cool. How can I combine them? Sure.
Say if you're making like an application like a
Mhm.
video game.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, should I heard that?
No, go for it.
So say you're making a video game and it matters whether the character is male or female.
Okay.
Won't that kind of situation call for something more like a .each than combining them?
Maybe. But remember, I'm not destroying game hash. Game hash still exists. So if the home and away divisions, for example, matter, cool. I can still get them this way. But I want a separate second representation of them that has all the players in one place. That just saved me from having to type all that out by hand every time. Great question. Lily, you had one?
No,
Rachel?
what if you wanted to find out who won?
What do you mean?
Like if you wanted to add up the points for everyone.
I see. Cool. So in that case, I probably I could even make a function that's like home team score, away team score, that does a similar thing where game hash doesn't change at all, but I'm doing whatever iteration and then saving that so I can reuse it in other problems. Of like recombining that information in different ways is helpful. Yeah.
It's kind of a dumb question, but like with creating, if your original hash that you have to work with in this data structure is really big, and you have to create other nested data structures, or even simpler data structures, is that not like memory intensive? And should we ever really worry about that?
Great question. So, is it memory intensive to make all these extra little copies? It depends. It's actually the opposite of that for what I'm suggesting here, because those players don't get saved anywhere. What it actually is intensive on is computing power, because every time I do this, it has to do that entire computation again. Now, if I save that in a variable that everything could see, now it's memory intensive. But am I calculating it every time, or am I saving it and referring to it every time? It's a sharp group. All right, let's figure out this players thing. So if I want to get all the players in one place, give me a naive way. So like not efficient, not clever. What is just like a dopey way to do that?
Game hash away players, and then go through each one.
Okay, and I heard concat over here. So yeah, what if we combine both of those? Game hash away players. So I say game hash away players. And so I'm going to call that away players. And then I can do the same thing for home players. And I can return away players dot concat home players. But that works. Let's see. So if I run this and say players, wow, there's 3 in good shape so far. And the hits keep coming and they don't stop coming. Cool. I have an array of players. That's a much easier problem to solve than like doing all those nested eaches and stuff. So, all right. Now we did this the naive way. We can clean this up a little bit more though. So, how do I clean that up more? I can do this in one line.
So I guess in Ruby world, where you don't use explicit returns,
Mhm.
you would just say game hash away players plus game hash home players, and that's it in your whole function. But
Yes. So we'll stick with the concat method rather than using plus.
Concat, then plus.
So instead of plus,
Yeah, it is now.
we'll do concat right off of that, and then we can say game hash home players, and I'll bet that works. Let's try it. Players. Cool. Same thing. Now, let's compare these two, because they're really not equivalent. So this was one way to do it. The other way to do it was this. Give me some pros and cons of these 3 versus this.
It's clean.
Cleaner? Ooh, what do you mean by cleaner? Be
It's-
specific.
I mean, it's just one line,
Mm-hmm.
and it's easy to read,
Okay.
and I mean, it's not more like a computer language.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't read like computer language. Love it. Lily, what you think?
The first one is easier for other people to read. It's more expressive.
Interesting. What you got?
you're defining variables in the first one that can be used later, which is helpful.
Sure. Now, they can't be used after this, because as soon as the function's over, those go away. But if I was doing other things in this function, maybe. What you got?
Yeah, I feel like I would just forget what the bottom one does if I looked at it like a week later. I mean, I could try to tease it out, but the top line, pretty straightforward, tells you what it's doing.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's explaining what it's doing as you go. Well, you get the away players, and then you get the home players, and then you concatenate them. Okay? Versus this line, you kind of got to read that one forward and then backward and then forward again to really get what it's doing. Now, there's not a right or wrong here. I will say that Ruby people tend to write this way. You read Ruby code, it's probably going to look something like this. If you read JavaScript code, it tends to look more like this, where like you jam it all into one line. And like there's some good and bad reasons for like why that's the case. I would recommend at this nascent point in your programming careers, writing it more like this. Yeah.
I guess it's just kind of like every time we see some sort of nested thing, my knee-jerk reaction is to start doing .each, but
Mhm.
I mean, is that, I guess the assumption is that the .each, it's kind of more flexible
Sure.
as opposed to like something kind of literal like that, the data structure might change. I don't know, what do you think about, you know?
All right, so that's another good question. So I've hard-coded away and home here because it's a basketball game. There's not a third team. But let's say it's not teams. It's something where we have an arbitrary number of these. Now, we need to start eaching. So let's take a look at what that would be. What's up, baby? What you need?
I'm missing something.
Ah, man, I didn't come up with the burn fast enough. Yeah, he's gone. All right. So let's say I can't take it as a given that I know what these keys are ahead of time, or there's only 2 or something. So in that case, I might very well want to approach this very differently. So to keep that there, but so I have game hash. I want to go through each of the arbitrary number of keys that this has. So what do I use? Dot each. Love it. And then, oh no, I haven't written Ruby in 2 weeks. How do I do an each? Do. What comes after the do? Pipes. Put an end over there. What goes in the pipes?
Descriptor of the numerator or the indexing or the.
Yeah, but if this is an array, I want the singular of whatever the plural thing is. So like if I'm players dot each, then I want this to be player. And students tend to like way overcomplicate that. Plural, singular, plural, singular, plural, singular. They'll like try to come up with a new word for it. But game hash isn't an array; it's a hash. So I have 2 things. What are they? The key and the value. So what are the key and the value? Location, team. Location, team. Dope. All right, so I have the location, I have the team. What am I doing in this loop to give me an array of all the players?
The player's key?
Mm-hmm. So the team's player's key, but what do I do with that?
You would add it to an array.
Okay. What array?
Or the value. Oh, I guess you need to initialize.
Sure. So I initialize an array there. Now what do I do with it? Shovel it in. Okay. Players, shovel players, and then return players. Cool. So let's see what that does. Okay. Players. Whoa, wait a minute. Anybody see what's wrong?
Yeah, it returned to an array.
It turned to like a nested array. And isn't that exactly what I told it to do? Oops, I got these titles backwards. Editor. Yeah, I shoveled in an array to this array. Yowza. That's probably not what I want to do. Go through it again. In programmer words, what's that? Iterate through it. With what? I like it. Why each and not map? Yeah. Yeah, I'm not returning anything out of this. Players, player. All right, and then what do I do with each player? Shovel them in. It's a little grim. But all right, let's see what that does. There we go. Mwah! And it's dynamic. So if I have home, away, and other, or whatever, the function still works. So I know what this stuff is ahead of time. I get something super descriptive, way easy to read, regardless of how well you want to trace the logic. I guess it's a little bit harder to read, but now it's dynamic. Those 2 things tend to go hand in hand. Yeah.
How to connect it with the hard-coded, easy to read, versus
Mhm.
dynamic? How often are you dealing with data structures that will change all the time, or how common is it you can just hard code a lot of stuff?
Most of the time they're dynamic. It's pretty rare that this happens, but I also see people immediately reach for this because of that. Even if, it's a basketball game, there's never going to be more than 2 teams. Otherwise, you're not playing basketball anymore. Cool. Other questions about the approach thus far? Cool. So now I have a list of players. That's a lot easier to work with than our like weird nested structure. But if we go back to the original problem, I'm trying to find a particular player's number of points scored. Is there any further way I can decompose this problem?
Finding a specific player first.
Yeah. How about something where I can just take players and get back a specific player? At that point, this is fucking easy mode. So I make something called find player. And then I want you to think how you would solve this. Keep it to yourself right now. How would you solve find player? Think sandwich code. Think to yourself for a second. I'm going to give you a minute. I'm going to call someone. And he surveyed the audience. Miwa, what do you think?
My first instinct would be like pass in a player, and if the player that was passed in matched the player that once we iterated through and matched, then it would be.
I like it. So we're passing in a player and we're trying to find a match. So I'm going to call on somebody else for how we find the match. Think to yourself for a sec. Yeah, so how do I find a match for this, presumably, in my list of players? Think to yourself. Adam, give me an idea. All right, so let's like, not even like the coding kind of stuff. Adam, help me think through like the logic of how do I know that I've found the player in players?
Well, I guess you just do a conditional.
Yeah, so I can just compare the name, and when there's a match, they're cool. Now, there's an enumerable that helps us with this very thing. Anybody know what it's called? Super close. .find. So I can do players.find. Also takes a block. Players, player. But to Adam's point, this is going to return the first thing where a conditional returns truthy. So I'm trying to find a name that matches. What's the condition? Anybody? Yeah, what is it called? Player name? Player name. Yeah. But that works. So first thing that this returns true for comes out of find player. We pass in a player name. Awesome. So let's say I'm trying to find old Jeff Adrian. If I did find player Jeff Adrian, sick. I get Jeff Adrian's hash back. Yeah.
Just a more like maybe minor question. When you're making you're making up the name for the iteration.
Yeah.
Like, because we have player name,
Mhm.
play. Would it ever be wise to baller or something, right? Like basketball or something like that, or what? Like to change that, or is that do you think like just having player as a constant name for
Mhm.
all the ones that you're working with is more helpful?
I think that's more helpful. Now, is another programming joke. You're just going to get a collection of these as you go through the program. Is that there's only two hard things in programming: cache invalidation and naming things. And off by one errors. You'll get one of these days. But naming things is legit one of the most difficult things in programming. Because a lot of the names you come up with are just lies waiting to happen. And I have never regretted sweating over trying to find a really good name, because when you start picking bad variable names, you start doing bad thinking. For example, find player. Okay, well, it sort of makes sense if I pass in, if I call this parameter player, right? But player isn't Jeff Adrian. Player is that hash. And so I can't tell you the number of hours in my programming career I have lost to like, why can't I do player at player name? Well, because it's not player. It was the player name. And I'm trying to find some key on a string or something. And so really sweat the names, even especially these method names. This should really be something like find player by name. That's a better name for that method. But yeah, let's say player also refers to something else in your domain. Absolutely, maybe baller is more appropriate. It helps you distinguish between them. But never forget, this isn't what your computer is running. All your computer knows is beeps and boops. It's all ones and zeros and shit. This is for you. This is for other people to read. And incidentally, your computer happens to use that to turn it into its language. But this is for us. Let's be very clear. Other questions? Yeah.
When you're doing the players that find, is that the players from the method of
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what it is. It's the return value of this. Whatever this evaluates to, which happens to be an array, I can call it up find on. Might get easier if you think of it like this. It's the same thing. Or if I did something like all players equals players and then made this all players. That does the same thing too.
So does that method only able to use that because it can use other methods? Like it doesn't see any of the other things within the method?
It can't see any of this,
Yeah.
but everything in here can see this. Accurate. Okay, back to the problem. Num points scored. I have a player name. I should have the means to get back a player. How do I do that? Anyone? Yeah. And then what am I passing it? Player name. And what do I get back from that? What am I going to call it? Player. Cool. And then our sandwich code, what's num points going to be? Player points. Okay. Yeah, let's see what happens when I run those tests. Num points scored. Green, baby! Pew! All right, now that it's green, I feel like we can clean this up a lot. How? How do I make this stay green, but not be so messy?
Get rid of the num points.
Yeah, I don't need that at all. Okay, did it stay green? It stayed green. And just like we did with the other one, I could also do something like, if I wrap that in quotes, I can do that, but that stays green too. Still green. But I have to evaluate, is that easier to follow? Ruby people would say no. So I'm going to say that that's probably our ideal Ruby solution. Not bloody bad. Probably a lot simpler than most of your solutions, yeah? Now also, we took a long fucking time to get there, and there's still loops. There's still all of those things. But if we can extract those out into smaller pieces, each of these by themselves gets a lot easier to follow. This takes practice, and like, you have to have done it the wrong way enough times. That's not even wrong. You have to do it the slow way enough times to really appreciate something like this and have eyes to see that. But always, always, always look for ways to solve an easier problem. Find the little pieces that you can reuse. Come up with these little utility functions. That's kind of like a separating the pros from the Joes. No offense to Joes, but
I have a question.
yeah.
About kind of the process. Like when you're doing labs like these, and there's maybe 10 definitions
Uh-huh.
or 10 methods it's going to have you write. Imagine sometimes it might be difficult at the beginning to know, oh, I need this helper function and this helper function.
Sure.
Sometimes find you start writing like the first or second function, and in the middle of doing that, like, I'm repeating code a lot.
Yes.
Okay.
Like, one of the mythologies that I think a lot of programmers have perpetuated about themselves is you stare at the problem, silence! And you go, Eureka! And then you like crap out a really elegant solution. It's not how it works. A way more realistic and repeatable process is called red-green refactor, and I just did it here. You have a failing test, hell or high water, you make it green. I could have also just done all the nested loops and stuff in there, whatever you have to do to get it green. Once you have a solution that's working, it's a lot easier to keep it working. And so you go, okay, how can I make this more elegant? How can I extract out some repeated behavior? And you're looking for it to stay green every time you change it. And then eventually you end up with a very elegant solution. But like, you never need to start there. That's never part of this. Yeah.
On line above 137
Yeah.
there, when you have player by name and then white space player name,
Yeah.
what is it implicitly doing?
Sure. So that's some Ruby magic. Rubyists tend to do that. It's just this. The parentheses are optional in Ruby, unless they're not. It's fucking language, man. But Rubyists tend to leave them off if it's something like this. Yeah.
So which is preferred, writing helpful functions to get to your main function,
Mhm.
or just being able to do it all in one method?
The second one and then the first one. So if you do whatever you need to do to get it green as fast as possible, even if the code is gross and sloppy and doesn't reuse the cool helper methods you wrote before, any of that kind of stuff, get it working. Then once it's working, then make all the helper methods so that you have this cool, sustainable, reusable pieces and stuff. Yeah.
So is the benefit for like having these more helper functions that are like components you can use in other things, or like?
So if you look at the next one, shoe size. Takes in the argument of a player's name, turns the shoe size for that player. Anyone want to take a crack at this one?
The same as the one before, just changed to shoes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, check this out. Just copy that. Shoe size. I think that's it, size, right? No, shoe. All right. By George, it's green. A lot easier than writing all up by hand. Yeah.
I just saw you do something shorthand, so you were in the, you were in the player, and then you just delete that one key. What was in that the brackets there? Was there just, did you select all and then just delete it, or was there?
Vim magic.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay.
That's what makes it such a powerful text editor is you can do shit like, I would like to change everything within the word that I'm currently in, and there's a little mnemonic for that. And I couldn't even tell you what the key commands are, but you do them enough times and your fingers just kind of know. Text editing at the speed of thought. Cool.
If you're a hash is JSON,
Mm-hmm.
not a hash,
Yep.
is there like a standard trick to make it a hash?
Yes, to parse it into a hash. So JSON, for anybody who's familiar with that, is what data type? Who knows? String. It's just a string. It doesn't have keys, it doesn't have values. It is a string that's formatted a particular way. So you run that through a JSON parser, and it'll turn that into whatever that parses into. In the case of Ruby, a hash.
So would your code be very similar if you just parsed it? Or would you have to make some tweaks to your
It'd probably be the same. So if this is all based on game hash, well, what if game hash is JSON.parse my JSON response? All the other logic's the same. Cool. Other questions so far? Cool. Next one. Team colors. Takes in an argument of the team name and returns an array of that team's colors. So, oh no, they weren't all just going to be find player by name problems. So, I want you to think about, given what we've just done together, team colors, sandwich code it, and team colors is some kind of array, and then we return team colors, and something in between gets us there. Think about how you would approach this problem. We need to give it the team name and get this back. Think to yourself for a sec. Did they take away this table just so I can't sit on it anymore? It sucks.
What was the question? Or,
We're getting a team name. We need to bring back this array. Let's see.
I feel like one thing we could do, if we think we're going to be doing things involving entire teams later, is like we made a find player method, we could make like a find team method.
Why not? I like it. So, yeah, what if I make a find team by name? That takes in a team name. And then, all right, that was my brilliant idea. I'm out of steam.
You just set the team name to the array you want.
So I have these away and home keys that I got to work through. How did I do that up here?
Oh, so we need to take the hash and like make a new array. Just like
How did I do that with players?
Could you just do like dot 2a?
Dot 2a, maybe. Let's see. Let's say I make a teams method. And I want to return games 2a. Let's see what that does. Teams. It didn't not work. I do have this team here, but I got this other shit. I have 2 arrays there. Any other guesses? There is like a really beautiful one-liner that'll work for this, but it's not 2A. We could map it.
Oh, each it?
Could each it. Even easier one. So find, if we have like an array, we could probably even do it with the hash. But keep in mind, if we have a hash, and essentially all I want is just these without the keys, that's kind of like I want the hash's values. So what if I did game hash values? Teams. Teams! So now I have an array of teams. Kyle, these fucking methods. So many. I can't keep track of them all.
Where's he going? Before he hits enter.
There we go. Wow. All right. So I have this enumerable thing. So this is everything that arrays and hashes have. Okay, but shoot, I don't see values on there. So what do I look for? The hash class. So look over here. The hash class has everything that enumerable has plus values. So if I want an array of just the values, there we go. Now here's like a thing that makes this easier over the long run. It's like, whew, that's kind of a lot of things there. And God, that's a fair sum of them also. How am I supposed to keep track of all those? The good news is that some of these are rare, like collect, concat, chunk while. Those are unusual. And also, just about every language either has something like this built in or has a really popular library that everyone uses. And so you start thinking things like, how do I get all the values of a hash? What's the equivalent of dot values in this language? And so you start thinking these abstractions. Ruby didn't come up with maps or something like that. JavaScript has them. Go has them. Java just got them kind of recently. So you start thinking those concepts, and they apply to a lot of different situations. Okay, so I've got the teams. I want to find team by team name still. How do I do that? Yep, why don't I use find again? I'm going to use the other syntax this time. So what's the condition I'm looking for? Team at, what do I call it? Team name. Equals team name. Instead of the double equals, I could have also done .eq, question mark. That's the same. Cool. All right, I can find a team by team name. So how do I do this? Find team by team name. Find team by name. Team name. So that's the team. And then I want their colors, so I just do team colors. I see your team colors shining through. I see your team colors. Oops, that's not what I want to do. Oops, maybe it isn't. Is it equal? Let's see if it's that. Oop, failed. Let's take a look. Undefined method, brackets, for nothing. Where's the error? Line 155. Okay. So what's this telling me?
Can't find something called colors in the team object.
It's saying that this, so this is how I get something on a hash. Take a look at the error. What is it? It's nothing. Okay, keep working backward. So if team is nothing, what does that tell us?
Find team by team name.
That this is returning nothing. Weird. So if let's say I throw a binding.pry over here. All right. And I say find team by name Charlotte Hornets. Nothing comes back. All right, well, let's fix that. So I'm going to put this back in the block syntax so we can take a peek at what's inside. Okay. And then you find it? All right. So over in here, I'm going to throw a binding.pry here. And for each team, I'm going to find out, all right, what is team? What's team name? Let's give it a shot. So all right, I'm there. What is, let's see. All right, so now I'm in here. What's team? Okay, cool. So that means that team name, Charlotte Hornets. Okay, what is team underscore name right now? Sick. So if I do interesting.
Oh, I see. Okay.
What about that? Huh. Weird. So now I kind of want to look at what that dot equal is. Oh, it's not a website. Ruby dot equal question mark. Oh, it is EQL, I'll bet. Yes. Okay, so the thing that I did is I'm checking to see whether or not they're literally the same thing, not if they have the same value. Cool. So then I change this. Just trying to be clever and teach something. Tell I'm not a Ruby developer. All right. So now if I fix that, I run the tests. I see your team colors shining through.
I think I missed something
Mm-hmm.
in the code. What is find team by team name?
Mm-hmm.
that method calls on teams.
Yes.
But teams is defined after. Why does that work?
Why does that work?
Can see like everything.
All the methods can see all the other methods. So they don't go top down. This goes top down, but all of these doesn't matter what order we define them in.
Okay.
Which is nice, because if that order did matter, every time you use some utility method somewhere, you go, oh, wait a minute, now this needs to go.
Is that Ruby specific?
All OOP languages work that way, and Gerbil script actually works that way out of the box, but everybody, for no good fucking reason, stopped JavaScript, being stupid. Everybody stopped writing JavaScript that way a year ago, and now everything's order dependent. It's a whole thing. But yes, that's pretty common. Yeah.
Can you explain what the teams method is doing again?
Yeah, what is this doing? So we got the game hash, which is this hash here. I'm calling dot values on it. What do you think that does? Oh, ask Rachel.
I think we should get, out of all the keys and values, it's just grabbing the values.
Yep. So I've got these keys, they have those values. If I want just the values in an array, dot values gives me that. I can also call dot keys and get an array with the away symbol and the home symbol. And if I do dot 2a, that gives me an array of the key and the value, and an array of the key and the value inside of an array.
So arrays or a key's value can be another key or another hash.
Yes, absolutely. A hash's key can have any value. Can be an object, I think. Can be strings, hashes, arrays, doesn't matter.
Wait, the key can be a string? Is that what you said?
No, I said the value of this can be any of the valid Ruby types. Coincidentally, the key can also be a string. It can be a string or a symbol. I think this is one of the sloppiest things about the design of Ruby, is that and that are both valid and mean different things. You can have a colors symbol as a key and a colors string as a key, and they're different. Stupid.
How does that differ in something JavaScript or whatever?
JavaScript, all keys are strings.
Oh, okay.
There's no symbols in JavaScript, right?
There are symbols. They're not used the way they are in Ruby, though. And then in Rails, DHH, the guy who made Rails, was like, wow, Ruby, that was pretty stupid. So Rails has a thing called a hash with indifferent access, where you can do either of these anytime, and it just makes them point to the same thing.
So how would that look on the hash if colors was a string like that? Would it literally just be the same thing?
It would be
Like that?
like that. Worth noting, though, that you have to, if you wanted to do something like that, you have to use this little hash rocket notation. If you use the other one that looks like key is always a symbol here. You can't make it a string. But if I make that same thing, that, now it's a string.
And that, the advantage is that now you can have spaces there.
The advantage is that I can make some of them keys and some of them strings. This is pretty uncommon. You don't see the hash rocket thing all that much in production Ruby. There's no good reason to not use a symbol, so everybody does. Just an FYI. But if you parse a JSON string, for example, all the keys are strings. This language, man.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So then
Mhm.
when you're calling method, it has to be underneath that?
Nope.
Or when you call it, can be anywhere too?
Can be anywhere also. So if I wanted to call, I'm going to call teams up here just to be bad. And actually, I'm gonna puts it. Oops. Oh shoot, maybe you can't. Maybe that is sequential. This fucking language, man. All right. Ah, yep, that's right. So, not the way that we're writing it here. I should note, though, that this is what we call procedural Ruby. You never write Ruby this way. Wrapping all of this is this class main. And so it's kind of like we did that. If you don't specify a class, it's just inside of that. And that's kind of what we're talking about tomorrow and really for the rest of Mod 1. And anything within a class can see each other. Cool. What else? Cool. I'm going to stop there. Final questions before we break for Hasketball review. Any other ones you were mystified by? Yeah.
Just more like, so it's okay to not be a wizard at writing your own helper method right now? Okay.
No. I would be shocked. I am shocked that Doug figured this out. Doug, you got some programming background? There you go. So it more to show you that there's always more than one way to skin a cat. And usually, when you find yourself working through some nested, loopy kind of thing, that there's probably a simpler way to do that. It usually starts with finding a simpler problem to solve. Goes back to whiteboarding this morning too. I don't know how to solve this problem. I know how to solve this part of this problem though, and then all of a sudden the entire problem gets easier.
Ryan, let's see the first method we did.
Mm-hmm. Num points scored.
Yeah.
The Rubyist prefer not to use parentheses because that is
Yep.
confusing to me.
It's confusing because this is such a bad language to start with. You can write it any way you want. I don't know how I want it. This is legal. It's required in almost every other like C-style language, like C, C++, Java, JavaScript, PHP. All of them like require you to write it that way.
Well, are you referring to the brackets?
The parentheses.
Don't you need those if you plan on calling it that as a global?
No.
In Ruby?
I can even do multiple arguments. Other one, third one, whatever. Parentheses are always optional
No,
there.
I meant like globally, like calling it on like another page as far as like a runner method in a sense.
Nope. The parentheses there don't make any difference. There are some places where parentheses do matter. That's not one of them. Other questions? Yeah, in the back.
Can you give us an example of when it does matter?
Yes. If I'm chaining things, I'll think of a. So there's things in Rails where I might say render JSON. I'm going to try to write with the least amount of syntax and then the most amount of syntax. Let's see. Some key, some value. Okay, so this line right here is like pretty by the numbers Rails shit. Now, these braces are optional throughout Ruby. So if I get rid of them, the problem is now I can't tell that this is one thing and this is the second argument to this render function. So I write this with the most syntax possible. That's a function call with parentheses. This is a hash that ends here. These two things are the same. This just has all the extra syntax. And as far as like when you need to have the stuff, I can't simplify this one down anymore, because if I take these off, there's no way for this to know that some key, some value, and status OK are part of different structures. If I leave them off, it thinks that JSON is a hash that has this key and this value and this key and this value. The parentheses work the same way. If I'm taking arguments, multiple arguments, and it's a part of a hash or something like that, at some point, you'll need to throw these things in to disambiguate it. If you're ever confused about it, start with the most syntax possible and just start taking stuff out and see what works. Because like in this situation, you can take those out, and that's, no, that was the thing I was just doing up there. That works. You can take these out, though. There's nothing confusing about that. Unless, if this had a second argument, now you probably got to have the braces in there.
Using like an explicit return on your functions, whereas I think it's just kind of going to get a knee-jerk reaction that anytime I'm going to return something, I explicitly say return.
Yep.
Team colors. Is there any like benefit to that?
Ruby people don't do that.
Because it breaks out, right?
Exactly. So if I do something like that in a block, it doesn't return that from the block like it would in JavaScript. It actually early exits the function. So you use returns to early exit out of a function. You can have a happy, healthy Ruby career without explicitly declaring returns. They're kind of a weird case. So I'd get in the habit of not doing them. I've never needed to use one in like real Ruby code before. And I gotta say, it was not a thing that I was really pumped about when I started writing this. It's become one of the things that I do just fucking love about Ruby. And I accidentally do it all the time in JavaScript now. Leaving off the returns is nice. Cool. What else?
How often do you see JSON in code these days?
JSON?
Or
JSON? Constantly. It is the standard data interchange format for basically everything on the web now.
Okay. So what it's going towards that, or?
It's there. So it's replacing XML. XML's dead. There's just no need for it. JSON does all the exact same shit with way fewer characters. So, and that matters because we're sending stuff over networks. Extra crufty characters, that just makes the size bigger.
I mean, is that like a language in itself, or is it just like syntax for a language?
It's neither. It's just a spec. It's a string that conforms to like a particular format. That's it. So in XML, I would do something like basketball player, and then I would have name, and I'd close that out. Okay, so that's XML. That same thing in JSON would be basketball player is way fewer characters, but they serve the exact same purpose. They're both for moving things around on networks, and you can do it with way fewer characters.
Is there a difference between XML and HTML? Because that looks like HTML.
Does look like HTML. HTML is a subset of XML. XML is everything that looks like this. HTML is stuff that looks like this with these 150 very specific things that follow a particular set of rules. It's like there's no basketball player tag in XML. XML doesn't tell you what the legal tags are. HTML is a certain set of legal tags in the XML format. Good question. What else?
Going back earlier to what you were saying of thinking your own helpful methods.
Mm-hmm.
You said if you're trying to like solve a problem,
Mhm.
you should first try to solve it like in the method alone, kind
Sure.
of like ugly, and then work backwards from there to make
Yeah.
them. Is there ever a reason to do it the other way, or are you going to contradict yourself a little bit?
If it's obvious, it's right there. I have this players thing already. I have find player by name. Just reach for it, grab it. But sometimes you'll start doing that, and you're like, ooh, I bit off way more clever than I can chew. Just delete your shit and start over again. And just do it out longhand. What else? Going once. Twice.
I just have
Yeah.
a Ruby question. I had like a Redditor telling me that like Ruby's dead.
All right. So let's see how dead Ruby is. 2019 language ranking. Okay, Tiob is like, I don't know what the fuck Tiob uses, but all right. 11th most popular language in the world as of this month, and rapidly rising. Dead. Eat shit. Dead.
I mean, that's what I get for engaging on Reddit.
Um,
What site is this? This like ranking site?
Yeah, this is the Tiob index. That one is like way overestimates certain things. Like VB.net is in no actual way the 6th most popular language. So let's take a look at RedMonk. This one has Ruby at number 8, above C.
Do you think the same thing people kind of underestimate PHP?
Like, very much so. All right, this one has. This one has Ruby at 14 and dropping. But, like, in all these lists, it's like a couple hundred. Dead. Stop. Twitter and GitHub. Both Ruby apps. They're out there. Same thing with PHP. PHP is phenomenally popular. What that means is I don't like using that language anymore. It's dead. Or like my hipster buddies and I don't make our side projects in that anymore. And like that's might very well be true. But there's so much. Like both of those languages were so big for so long that we're going to be maintaining like Ruby and PHP apps for the next 30 years. Yeah.
This is kind of Java specific. Are there like industries or maybe even companies that take really web applications that are written in 90s code
Mhm.
and then transform them into modern web stuff? Or does that stuff kind of happen as it goes?
It kind of doesn't happen. There's a good reason for that. There's no shortage of programmers who go, you know what would make this app good if it weren't in PHP? And then they rewrite it in whatever, and the app gets worse. And it's because that like shitty PHP code is also battle tested, and like that works. And somebody goes, well, I'm going to rewrite it in this. And it doesn't have the exact same features, and so they sort of guess a little bit. And they ended up with something that is, I don't know, way cooler, but doesn't work as well. And then they go, oh, well, it's because that team sucks. So they fire that team halfway through and they bring in another team. And then they fire those people and bring in another. And then what's cool has changed. They go, oh, the entire problem is we were doing this in TypeScript in the first place. Really should have done it in Haskell. And like that cycle just keeps going. And so there's a reason that like Facebook didn't stop using PHP. Now, some things that do happen are Facebook doesn't use regular PHP anymore. Facebook is the biggest PHP app in the world, and these languages, if you were ever wondering, are just like maintained by people. Like in the case of PHP, they have like kind of a steward of the language. It's a company called Zend that offers PHP consulting services. That's a pretty common pattern, by the way. Is like, we manage all the pull requests of this open source language, and we make sure that it has features that people want. Also, we sell consulting in it. Zend is not a big company, and Zend in no way could keep up with like the just barrage of fixes to PHP that the Facebook engineers were dumping. And so it's an open source language, so Facebook forked it and said, cool, enjoy PHP. We're going to take everything that it is and make our own version of it called Hack. And so that's what PHP uses now. Ruby's in a similar boat right now where there's a couple choices that the Ruby team made lately that some people didn't like, especially like sticking with the super object-oriented thing. Object-oriented programming is like not popular right now. Everything's supposed to be functional. So they did a functional rewrite of Ruby in a language called Crystal, but like doesn't mean Ruby's dead. It means that like also there's this other thing, and it has happened many times before that the really cool popular rewrite of the thing just dies on the vine or fractures a community and then both of them kind of go under. But Ruby is not going anywhere. But I'm not surprised that you heard that. JavaScript's dead, PHP's dead. Anything that I'm not currently working with is dead. Cool, what else? Go learn something.